Hi, everyone. All of you out in the audience there. First, let's have the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. And anyone wishing to address the commission on any item should fill out a request form and present to the clerk prior to the completion of the staff presentation. Okay. Presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the commission. And there's no presentations. And now let's, we got, as far as the consent agenda, consideration of the approval of the minutes of the October
Mr. Chair, can you
12th.
turn your mic on, please?
Turn it on.
Turn it on, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Consideration of the approval of the minutes of the October 12th, 2015 Environment and Utilities Commissions.
I move the minutes.
What's that?
I move the minutes.
Okay.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And now the consideration of Resolution 15-2, establishing the date, time, and location for meetings of the West Sacramento Environment and Utilities Commission. Do we have?
I move the resolution.
We have a motion
I
to.
can second that.
Second, all right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. And now the regular agenda. Public workshop on the general plan 2035 draft natural and cultural resources and public facilities and service elements.
David Tilley. He may actually show, coming back from a AB 52 consultation, which is part of this section, actually. Just to go over, this is part of the general plan. This is only portion of the elements that will be in that ultimate document. We're looking to release the draft on the street in January, as a lot of other things will trail after it. So in this portion of the, how do you get out of this thing? How do you do this? That one, okay. Sorry about that. So in the natural and cultural resources element, which is also known as open space, you have several elements that underpin that section. Cultural resources, which is AB 52 and SB 18, which are required consults with the tribal communities when you go through a general plan update, or and they establish some of the policies that you want to follow and as development occurs. It also talks about the commitment to protection, the beautification, balance of growth, and conservation with parks and green belts and open space corridors. So those policies will be very, think of them as like a 30,000 foot level. So it's not going to detail specific details of those, just kind of give a generality of where we want to go with the policies. Those policies then in these documents would be further refined in other either park master plans, zoning ordinance, other development documents, which are much more specifically oriented towards those specific tasks, as this is part of an overall document that, again, is a very high level review. And the attachment goes into some of the concepts and the policies and the goals of each of these sections that are attributed to the elements we're discussing tonight. The natural recourses element has several sections that are detailed agricultural, biological, urban forestry, water quality and resources, energy use, conservation, scenic resources, historical and archaeological resources. These are, are all the elements that will be broken out in the attachment. If you peruse through that, you would see policies again and goals that underpin each of these. Some of them are more significant than others, obviously, given our surrounding levee system. That's obviously water quality and resources is significant from that perspective, as well as obviously we're in a drought. So those elements become a little bit more important than other communities where they aren't such that much of an issue. Moving on to no, safety element. Keep on. Where it is? I don't see it in the slide here. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Part of the safety element, which is also required, is part of the general plan section. Deals with protect and enhance the public health. Also, SB 5, dealing with flood control, is a very important piece of that puzzle, which deals with emergency preparedness, flood hazards, seismic, geological hazards, climate, hazardous materials, and noise. Those are all elements that will be further refined. Policies and goals will be included globally to address those in the document. And additional documents and procedures will be refined as you get more specific, especially on a project level. This is a very global look at the issues that are contained within that section. Then you have the public facilities and services element that deals with the public facilities, infrastructure, support plan development. So we have enough infrastructure capacity to address the needs for the existing residents, but also the proposed development, and convey the types of utilities that are needed to complete that infrastructure. We also have improvements that are needed for infill and smart growth. Obviously, the more impacted and condensed amount of development that you do carries its own types of infrastructure needs, and your downtown elements deals with your main downtown core and elements that you want to bring people into that area. And then the public facilities and services themes, you have the water master plan, financing for the CIP program, water and treatment, water conveyance, wastewater collection disposal, drainage, recycling, waste, communication, schools, libraries, police, fire. Those are all elements that will detailed out in the policies and goals that the general plan will outlay. And again, those will be further refined as you have other documents that are much more refined and deal with the implementation of those goals that are set forth in this document. And so again, this is a very global view, hence the name general plan, that kind of sets the tune, the foundation of where you want to proceed forward with the rest of your policies, documentation, ordinances will underpin these, as this will be the overriding document, and everything will proceed underneath that and detail those out. So you would look for something very detailed specific in this document. It would be a goal that would then be refined in a document that is appropriate for if you want to establish where the parks are, then you could do, through the land use, you would designate you want to have parks in this location, but the Parks Master Plan would then refine what kind of park it is, what kind of elements you would want to have in that park, and so on. And this, the general plan, we're looking to release that document in draft form in January of next year. At this point, it concludes my presentation. If there's any questions, I noticed Mr. Tilley walked in as well. Staff is here to answer any of the questions that you have, and then get your recommendation and concerns. We can move them on to the council when they hear the ultimate hearing.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it. Mike, one question I would have is that moving forward, I mean, there's huge components to this. Would we be seeing some of these particular areas moving forward? You know, I mean, as we're drilling down into the details and, you know, stormwater, for example, just as an example, or any other, these other areas?
In order to keep the January date, this is the,
oh, yeah,
this
right.
is the one chance for this body to, have comments, concerns. Again, we wouldn't necessarily maybe have an answer tonight, but if you had a concern or comment, we would certainly move that forward and have it addressed in the future. But in order to keep the timeline that we have, this is the opportunity to bring forth any comments or concerns that you have, and we can address those moving forward to the next hearing as this body meets next in February, and the document is slated to be released in January.
Does anyone have? Oh.
I have two questions. One is, well, two questions to start, and then probably more as we go through. The first is that we didn't receive a copy of the safety element within our packets, or at least I didn't. I don't know if anyone else did receive that. And so given that there's a number of air quality and climate change topics that are very much within this commission's jurisdiction that we haven't had a chance to review and comment on, is that intended because that document's still under works? Is that part of the January release? Would there be an opportunity to get a little bit more detail on the city's plan for those issues tonight, if the goal is for that element to be released in January along with everything else in the general plan?
Evening, I apologize for being late. My name is David Tilley. I'm the project manager for General Plan, and we were just out at Yochadehe with the natural cultural resources element, so I just got back literally. What's occurring now is all of the draft elements for the general plan have been released for public consumption, be it in front of your commission, in front of the planning commission. Some have been to council already. What we're trying to get out the door in January is the general plan EIR. And so in the meantime, while that document is germinating, there's still opportunity to refine some of the policy statements, especially to the extent that they don't affect any of the conclusions, in the general plan EIR. I think you mentioned air quality and climate change. That's a big one because the big court case that just came down about a week and a half ago is changing how that analysis needs to be done. Mm-hmm. And so that is going to set us back a little bit in terms of some of the climate change. So we may need to review some of the policies in light of that court case. But we are trying to seek input tonight, principally on the public facilities element, and then the natural and cultural resources element. A lot of aspects of those seem to be within the jurisdiction of this commission, but we would like to try to get that this evening, so we know you won't meet again until February.
Would the intention then to bring the safety element back to this commission in February once you've had a chance to incorporate those changes to reflect the court case?
Yeah. Time permitting. That's it wasn't our intention to do the safety element this evening. this is a good part about the general plan, because there is a lot of internal consistency, and some elements sort of overlap each other. And so, but, not everything is necessarily in the domain of one commission or the other. So we've been sort of using the planning commission for the sort of the Uber level before we get to council, and then some of the other commissions that have a more focused mission that hopefully can give us some more detailed responses on some of these subject matter areas. But otherwise, I want to let Justin continue tonight.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. In that case, I do have a question and a comment regarding the natural and cultural resources element, if we can start there. And looking at the section on agricultural resources, my first question is regarding the NCR 1.5 homeowner notification. And I was wondering if you could give me a little bit of background on the reasoning behind homeowner notification in that regard.
Typically, when you buy a house that's adjacent to, agriculture or somewhere they're using, methods, there'll be dust, there'll be machinery, and you want to make sure that the homeowner is going to be aware of these developments exist. It's a policy in the general plan to have property that isn't developed and isn't in imminent development to be encouraged to have agricultural production occur on that land. So if you live in the southern portion of town where still a large portion of it's undeveloped and there's agricultural going on, and you're looking at buying a house and you're not aware, you have a notification such as this that would go part of their documentation. So they're signing something of they're aware and notified that this activity does occur adjacent to your development or just on the other side of it.
Thank you. The reason I asked the question is I'm a member of a Facebook group of West Sacramento residents, and I often see during this time of year a lot of questions about people generally in the Southport area of the city who wonder what these loud booms are on certain hours of the day, certain days of the week. And the reason for those booms is duck hunting going on in the Yellow Basin. I was wondering if, for the same reasoning, there's a homeowner notification for these residents who live near agricultural areas, there could also be a homeowner notification for residents who are neighboring the Yellow Basin or other hunting areas, just so perhaps it's clear to those homeowners at the time of purchase what is going on in the surrounding areas, so there's not this recurring confusion about certain activities.
We can certainly look into that possibility. I have not heard one for hunting. I've heard one for abrogation, overflight, but we can certainly look into it and see if there's a possibility to address that.
Thank you. And I certainly don't know what the, fiscal realities of including that are, so of course that's entirely dependent on there. But I do know, just as a member of this West Sacramento Facebook group, that there is this recurring confusion around hunting season. But my second comment regarding the agricultural resources portion, I notice that there's 1.6, the right to farm ordinance, and talk about how the city shall continue to implement its ordinance. I was wondering if there's a reason that there's no provision within this goal discussing urban farms or farmers markets. I know that there are quite a number of urban farms here in West Sacramento and that they are growing and even getting national recognition, and so I think that's an excellent thing. I was wondering if that would be an appropriate suggestion to insert into this 2035 general plan.
That would be something that would be further refined in the ordinance. So the general plan is establishing the policy and the goal to do it, and then you develop an ordinance that deals with, how do you get the water, what can you do, where the locations of that are. So it's the refinement that you would be searching for would be within that ordinance that's dictated by the general plan, saying overall you need to have established that goal. So the ordinance takes care of the details, and I think that's where you would be directed to by staff to look for those elements.
Okay, thank you. I just wasn't sure whether the right to farm ordinance, so that was sort of poking around in the West Sacramento Municipal Code, was more towards those large-scale farmers towards the edges of the city, or whether it also covered the growing urban farm movement within. But, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I have one, and I guess it's a comment. It's actually on the same page. It's that NCR 2.1, the public awareness. And I'm not sure of the legalities or the overlapping responsibilities, but I mean, as far as public awareness specifically, support development projects and programs. What about the schools being involved? Because a lot of these areas have to do with public awareness, water conservation, native plants, et cetera, to provide some kind of a program or overlap to where the schools are involved with much of this, the rain capture and gardens, for example, that are now basically in every school. And is there a component that would be, allow the schools to participate within this framework?
Schools are governed by the state.
Right.
And so they can choose to participate. We talk about schools in a very general sense,
Yeah.
and having the capacity and the location for them, but in terms of those specific uses, operational characteristics of a school, that is governed by the state. So we could certainly work with them, but long as it is a designated school function, their operations, that would be something that would be sort of hands-off
Yeah.
to the city.
But I
Thank you.
think that in the context of, the language that is written here of encouraging and supporting that development, that there's certainly a role for city government within that, even if it is a state, even if the overall operations are at the state level. So I guess I would support maybe if there is a nuance there of providing educational materials or saying that this is something that we're doing as a city as a whole. I think there's maybe a better, that there is some sort of nexus there that we can look at of getting more involved in, and beyond just saying that we can't do anything governing their operations, but maybe there's some in terms of outreach days for the schools, or that there's maybe something else that we could do within that context, so.
My thought was that, like, for example, the Clarksburg Trail runs contiguous with River City School, and right along through there, which is part of what was described here as far as enhancing and protecting some of the native plants and all that, well, that's on their property as well. And so if we can find some mechanism to work with them to enhance their portion of the trail, which runs up above that, and then, of course, where the city property is, and that's kind of my thought on it.
We could certainly endeavor to work in partnership with them and encourage those elements where appropriate and there's ability to do so. Certainly we would strive to do that.
I have a sort of clarification question before we get too far into this document. What are the abbreviations at the end of each of these sections in reference to? The PI and
right.
RDR and IGC?
Yeah, those are abbreviations really referring to sort of under what sort of mechanism these various policies, will be implemented. So, for example, PI means public information.
Okay.
IGC is intergovernmental cooperation. RDR is like regulations and development review. So it's just sort of under what means some of these things would be accomplished. And, some of them are just that, master plan level, things. So I know we realize we're sort of giving you a sort of a abridged version, if you will, of the overall general plan policy document. But that's what those refer to.
Okay, thank you.
Moving forward in the natural and cultural resources element, I had a question regarding table 3.8, and it's on page 2-12 of the packet that was provided to the commission. And my question goes towards number 9 at the bottom of page 2-12, where it says the city shall amend its zoning code to include requirements that new development achieve 50% shading of constructed and paved surfaces within 5 years of completing construction. And first, I just want to say I think that's an excellent goal. But my question was, I saw on the side of the chart that that has an X marked for the years 2019 to 2023. I assume those are the years when the city hopes to achieve that goal. My question was, is there a particular reason why we're waiting until 2019 to 2023 to achieve that instead of at a quicker timetable?
And so there was, I would suspect there was time allowances for that to occur before it was enacted, so that gives the time for the general plan to move forward. If that policy is ultimately ratified, then you would move forward with the zoning code overhaul, and that would be an element that would be in the ordinance. And so it takes time to take that through the process. It wouldn't just be that one element that would be updated in the ordinance. It would be, the entire overhaul to address changes in your general plan. So it's a timing mechanism more than is it anything else.
I see, thank you. And so there's no way to, or perhaps it's less preferable then to update the zoning code piecemeal? You're saying it's better to update it all at once, incorporating the general plan's suggestions?
Given that, there's a multitude of ways to do it, but typically you finish your general plan and then you address, following that, the zoning ordinance follows the direction of your general plan, so the policies are then refined, and as this policy here would be directed and much more detailed in your zoning ordinance, so that has to go through the vetting process, the public hearing process, and ultimately be approved by council. So there's timing. Yes, you can do a piece of the zoning ordinance at one time, and it does get amended, but when you look at the entire general plan update, it's going to entail many sections, and so it's on the process, it's in the pipeline to do the complete overhaul. I suspect if we didn't have a complete overhaul, doing a piece here and a piece there would be a different story, but some of those pieces of the ordinance are quite outdated. They need to be revised to current trends. And so an overhaul of the zoning ordinance is something that staff is looking at definitely proceeding with after this.
Thank you, that makes sense. And I suspect then that probably is the same answer to my next question. My next question being, looking at the chart on page 2-15, and this is number 19, where the city shall replace existing streetlights with LED streetlights with the goal of replacing 100% by, well, this says by 2015. I assume that's an error. But again, I think that this is an excellent goal to change out the streetlights to LED lights in terms of conservation. My question being, I see again on the box on the side that that's checked as being a goal for 2019 to 2023. My question is there a reason for that, or is there a reason that perhaps we could step up the switchover of these streetlights to the period of 2016 to 2018?
Well, this is development engineering, which is a little beyond planning. I do know that our current policy that we have in place still uses and directs the older style lighting. LEDs aren't even recommended in the policy standards that they're using, which this is going to revise. The timing-wise, we need to go through the process, but David's probably had much more detail.
Well, fortunately, we have done this already on many streetlights in town that we own. But there are many that our PG&E still owns, and since they own them, they also still pay the bill. And so before we can convert any of those additional streetlights that PG&E owns, we have to have a financing mechanism, not only to pay for the LED retrofit, but then to ultimately then that means if we do that, then we take over the bill for those lights. So it is something that we'll want to do. And the timings that we're putting in these, in the implementation programs, I mean, those are estimates at this point in time. You know, council ultimately decides if some of those they want to prioritize more, and then we can, some of those, you know, may get moved up. And if we say we're not going to do it till 2019, it doesn't mean that we can't do it sooner if workload and time, you know, and resources, you know, permit. So this is one where fortunately we had a pretty good program with Siemens to be able to redo most of the lights, particularly in Southport, are already LEDs. And so, but we still have more to do.
Thank you.
Now, a lot of these headlines, they talk about funding. The city shall explore funding opportunities to finance the street light replacement program. So when you say the city shall explore funding opportunities, are we looking at ballot measures that are gonna come on board that, hey, it's gonna go onto the city's residents, or?
Well, it could be like the deal we did with Siemens, where we're able to finance that, and then ultimately the energy bill savings end up paying for the whole program.
Okay.
You know, that's when a big effort like this, you know, the hardest part is, you know, having all the funds up front to be able to do a project. You know, if you're talking about an assessment district, you know, it can take years
Yeah.
for enough money to get into the pot to be able to do a meaningful project. So we want to be able to use all creative financing mechanisms we can to accomplish, you know, some of these goals. And the Siemens one was unique because there was even some state legislation that had to be passed to allow that to occur. And I don't know all the ins and outs of how that was financed, but it allowed us to go to, you know, to Siemens directly on that one rather than a more traditional, you know, bidding mechanism. So the general plan here in that one is definitely, you know, meant to be high level. You'll see things like that, explore funding, and then the implementation of that is refined through the capital improvement program and other mechanisms to get these things built in the real world. Encourage the commission to think of the general plan as a very foundational policy document that is then in turn implemented in the real world via various mechanisms, you know, not the least of which is the zoning ordinance.
So in looking at implementing practices out of this plan, how do you intend to prioritize potentially competing goals that are outlined in this? So, for example, one that I was thinking about when, you know, Alex mentioned the 50% tree cover. Obviously, having an urban forest and having trees accomplishes a lot of goals, but there is a water use that comes with that, especially in establishing new trees versus well-established trees that require less water once they've had the root systems established. And so my question with that is how do you choose which to push and how hard to push when there's a balance that you have to strike in implementing these policies?
Well, we will always prepare recommendations for the commission consideration and ultimately city council consideration on how they will prioritize things. Our current landscape guidelines, it doesn't say it in so many words, but it does have a 50% shading in it, but the document was written many years ago and is really not consistent with how things are done now, especially with the new water efficient landscape ordinance that's up for council consideration, you know, this week. So partially why we need to have that in there is because we really need to update our entire landscape guidelines that were totally written in a different era and are not, even though they address water-wise and things, that's nothing like it is, you know, today. It still talks about turf and all the things, and, you know, we're not doing that anymore. So it's something we definitely need to do, and I would hope we could be able to do it probably a little faster than at least what we're suggesting thus far in the implementation program. But my suspicion is that once we're in front of council, some of those X's are going to shift columns quite a bit based on what they prioritize as well.
Do we have any more questions?
I had a question in the biological resources section, the natural and cultural resources element, 2.9 on net loss or no net loss with regards to wetlands, other waters, and associated functions and values. Is this intended to be no net loss within West Sacramento, or is this within Yolo County, California, U.S., and sort of question of scale of what we're looking at for no net loss here?
This will be in terms of our community, what projects we approve. So, you know, beyond our borders is up to other means.
Okay. And would there be some incorporation with the the Yolo Habitat Conservancy Program, because I know that, we heard presentation on that back in April or June about trying to regionalize a little bit for how we're doing conservation.
Yes, and then that is one of the means by which some of the conservation objectives can be achieved, since, the species don't stop at the city limit line, per se. So we will continue to participate in that program.
Thank you.
I had a question moving on towards the public facilities and services element, and it's in the table 3.6 on page 2-13. And again, it may be the same answer as before, but I was wondering, I was looking at numbers 6 and number 7 on page 2-13, where number 6 says the city shall conduct a study to examine options for conserving the supply of fresh water by using gray water for landscaping. And number 7 says the city shall conduct a study to examine options for conserving the supply of fresh water by using rainwater for outdoor irrigation. And I think both of those studies and the intent behind them are excellent, given the serious drought that California is facing. And that sort of prompts my question, where again, I see that X box next to it is checked for the years 2019 to 2023. I was wondering if that was postponed towards those dates because of just limited resources and other time constraints, or whether there was any way to perhaps conduct those studies sooner during the current drought.
It's certainly possible. Ultimately, the council's going to help prioritize all of these. We've put our stab at it thus far to start, but there's definitely a flexibility within, which things get done first. It's ultimately a matter of which does the city prioritize, and then what is our capacity to implement those within those timeframes. But fortunately, the timeframes is solely the city's discretion. We aren't subject to any additional oversight primarily on when we decide to do these things. So if they get put on our work program, sooner than what we say, then we'll do them sooner. So this will have to be a whole separate discussion with council about every implementation program in the general plan as to which ones we're going to do first. And there's going to have to be some trade-offs there, without a doubt, because there's a lot of things we want to do.
Sure, thank you.
I had a couple of questions regarding the water treatment and stormwater drainage in the same section. I recognize that West Sacramento's primary source of water is surface water from the rivers, but one of the big conversations, especially within the drought in terms of new water sources, is wastewater reuse or stormwater recapture. And I didn't see any mention of either of those within this plan. Not necessarily advocating we should go down that route, but I was wondering if those had been considered in the development of the general plan.
Yes, there are some things already afoot. We already do use some stormwater recapture for some irrigation purposes in town. Our biggest challenge on wastewater is getting it back to us, from the plants in Elk Grove. But I know that's already being, looked at as, can we connect somehow, some way? I think in the interim, the option that we have, particularly for residential uses, is gray water. That's really an untapped resource that we have not really been doing a lot with yet. But there's all kinds of products even that individual homeowners can use that actually could connect right into their system for irrigation, basically using shower water and also water from your washing machine that you can plug right into your drip irrigation system and irrigate that way. So that's where we're actually working with PG&E on that, as a matter of fact, because water savings is also energy savings. Our biggest bill around here for electricity is pumping water around. So anything we can save on water also saves us on electricity, which ultimately saves everybody money.
Great, thank you. And then on the solid waste and recycling element, so we had a long conversation back in October about the new recycling contract that we're in the process of negotiating and figuring out exactly where we're going forward on that. But in light of some of those conversations, I was concerned that there were elements in this section that are not totally consistent with state law and aren't consistent with the plans that we have in place right now for the direction we're going for negotiating that contract. in particular, what the city is doing for the mandatory commercial recycling requirement, what we're doing for planning organics capacity, for handling that collection from commercial and other sources. And so I was wondering if there's a plan to incorporate that a little bit more into the general plan, or if the idea is that that will just be focused within our new waste contract.
Well, in my estimation, the general plan will be the place to build that policy foundation.
Okay,
That then you'll then build into, the future, future waste hauling contracts. So,
okay,
so now's the time to get some of those elements, in here to help give us an even better foundation for when that we ultimately do those negotiations.
okay. So then, if that's kind of the direction we're looking at, the couple of places that I was looking at, maybe we might want to consider tweaking in this to bring us into line with what we talked about in October, potentially. So there's a discussion in 5.3 on landfill capacity, and whether or not it would make sense to also include a organics processing capacity, given the new requirements for cities to look at the ability to handle organics in the long term.
Well, this is the kind of input we're looking for tonight,
Okay.
so this is good.
Okay,
And I can work with Dave. I haven't actually reviewed that section myself, so I'll look at it
okay.
in light of the negotiations and also
Right.
my awareness of AB 1826 and 341.
1826 and I think 876 is a new reporting requirement for organics planning that just passed
Oh, I'm not familiar with that one.
about 3 months ago, so it's coming. And so as we're thinking about kind of what this looks like. And then in 5.10 to 5.13, there's a lot of language about the city shall encourage composting of food, it shall encourage businesses to reduce yard waste. And I think that we can use stronger language here, given that a lot of these will be mandatory requirements for at least some business sizes. And so do we want to try to incorporate all businesses? Or are we just looking at meeting kind of the minimum sizes that are required by the state law, and kind of where we want our focus to be as a city for how inclusive those are? So those were just a couple of thoughts that I had on the solid waste and recycling part. I mean, I think it's the direction we want to go, but given that we're doing a lot of work both with the contract and with this plan at the same time, that it would make sense to, if we're going to aim for it in our recycling contract, let's aim for it in the general plan as well.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right.
So-
The general plan should be the foundation for almost everything else that, we do as a city, one way or the other. So I can work with Paulina to try to get this stuff to be, tracking well with the waste hauling contract process.
And then I think with that, in the table describing specific implementation programs, that there's maybe a place for potentially some stronger language in points 18 and 19, or point 18 with regards to commercial outreach. I mean, I think that certainly residential outreach is of not just participation, but that there is a requirement, at least for some businesses within the city to participate. So just wanted to mention those. And then the last question I had was on point 19 within this table regarding reducing consumption of disposable plastic bags. So I recognize that we'll all be voting on this next November for a statewide potential plastic bag ban, but I was curious as to how you saw this fitting in with the overall state, regardless of which direction that law goes, of how this would fit in.
Well, this was crafted probably a little ways back when this type of thing was sort of in its infancy, and many communities have passed those bans. Thus far, at least, we have left it in this manner, because I also know some of those bans have been litigated. But if the state, voters end up passing something that, makes this moot, then, so be it. But I think our goal here is to try to, advance some of these notions. And then, if they're supported by the commissions and then ultimately by the council, then we'll work on refining how they're implemented. But this is a place to start for these initiatives, that we may carry forth, in the future. This is the temptation is always to think about the here and now, and then this is a 20-year look at, our community from a, many different, perspectives. And ultimately, the council has to prioritize, what is it that they want to do, first.
Sure. And I appreciate that in compiling a document like this, you're balancing a lot of timelines that are all running at the same time. So
That is part of why this has been
appreciate the work
challenging.
that's
This-
been done into it.
The
so.
world around us has not stopped while we've been doing this.
Right.
And so just the other day with the greenhouse gas case that came down, I have to redo my greenhouse gas calcs when I thought I was done. And it's just the way it goes.
I will say that on the whole, I think that these elements are doing a good job of crafting what city policy looks, for myself, that I think they're doing a good job of crafting what the city policy guidelines look like going forward. And, I think that we all like to see details on it, but in terms of a general 30,000-foot plan, I mean, in my mind, this is, I thought, very thorough and very careful consideration of a lot of the factors that are going into what the city is looking at going forward, so.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, reflects the work of a lot of individuals, both here on city staff currently and some that have been with us, in the past. So we appreciate you hearing that. Part of our objective by bringing the policy elements to the commissions is not just about, what they say, but how they say it. I mean, do they make sense? It should be very clear what the policy says when you just read it. You need not be a professional planner to, you should not need to be a professional planner or someone who's used to this type of stuff to understand really what the city's goals are, out of this. So I thank you very much for that.
Any other questions, comments, or? Yeah, I'd just like to second it, because I was gratified to see, having been a certified gray water designer, I was nice to see that piece of it in addition to some of these other ones. So, I want to thank you and all the folks involved putting this together. Do we need a motion, or? Yes.
No, I think we can.
The item was just asking for your feedback,
Oh, okay.
Yes,
general comment.
yes.
So,
Any more comments or questions, or?
Well, I'll just echo what the chairman and Commissioner Morrison said, where I think it's excellent, the amount of work that's been put in by so many people into this general plan, and it's certainly the vision for the city that I want to live in the future, so I'm glad it has that.
Yeah.
And I thank city staff tonight for answering our questions so thoroughly.
Right. Thank you again for having us on this item and letting us be before your commission.
Thank you. Thank you. And I believe, that's it, right?
Well, I did have a question regarding the general administration function, part 2 of the agenda, in terms of future agenda item requests by the commission. I don't know if now is the appropriate time.
But,
yeah, go ahead. We're on that item now. So,
Okay.
Oh, perfect. The question being, I know that our next scheduled meeting is for January, and if...
No, February.
Or February?
February?
Is it
Yeah.
February?
Yeah, February.
February.
February 8th.
That is 2 months from now, so that makes sense. Thanks. But in February, we'll be hopefully in the middle of El Nino and getting some good rain. I was wondering if perhaps an item on the agenda then could be an informational presentation by city staff to the commission, just regarding what the city's flood protection and levee improvement plans are, perhaps just some detail on what the status of those projects are and what the future timeline for completion of those projects will be.
yeah, I think that, I know that the flood protection program is meeting with the Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission. I'm not sure where that, like, David was mentioning, there's different things that kind of cross over with different commissions, so I'll have to check to see if that's an appropriate presentation. If it is, then we can definitely set that up.
Well, and I think perhaps in, maybe the additional piece of that would be how that fits into the city's drought measures, because just because we're getting a lot of rain doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a need for continued water conservation, and I think that's a tough message to necessarily convey when we're getting a lot of, hopefully, a lot of rain coming. So there might be an element of that that I would be interested in hearing more on, of how we're balancing those two those factors as well.
All right, thank you.
I was going to give you an update, since we're on that item. We've already adopted the commission calendar, which would be item A of the general administration function, but I just had a quick update on a couple of items for you with related to water conservation. So we are focused a lot, given the move to the winter months, our outreach and education is moving to indoors, and we're also promoting the fact and reminding residents that the water needed to get out of this drought is about 100 inches. So for us to get 100 inches of rain this particular wet season is probably not going to happen. So that is going to be a major focus of our outreach efforts, is to remind people that even though we're getting rain now, we're in a severe drought that has been going on for the last several years. And we have a deficit from past years in addition to the current deficit that we need to meet. And so that'll be a major focus of our outreach efforts. We are doing well with our mandate. We are required to do a 28% reduction for the months of June through February as compared to the same calendar months of 2013. In November, we hit 25%, which is actually really very impressive for this time of year. And we have a cumulative of 35% to date. So we're tracking and trending really well to meet the 28% cumulative reduction. And then with regard to the waste management contract, we did receive council's their authorization to take our recommended action of negotiating with waste management for a very limited term. So we started that process, and we have until January 19th to come up with an acceptable agreement that meets both the city and waste management's needs. And if we can't, at that point, we would recommend to council that we go to bid. So we'll take that item to council in February, depending on how negotiations go. It'll either be recommended action to sign a contract with waste management or to start the negotiation, or the bidding process.
No.
Go ahead. I mean, as far as the negotiations, is there any feedback as far as?
At this point, we're just, having a new franchise agreement that has a completely different focus. It's diversion-based, a lot of the things that Karen mentioned. It's a completely new style of contract. I actually just received the draft of it recently, so I'm just going through that and, making sure all of our desires are in that. And then, Waste Management will do their review, of course, legal. So it's we're in the baby steps. It doesn't seem like, seems like we should be farther along, but it's a lot's going to happen all at once. We get everything in one document, and then we all start picking and negotiating what works and what doesn't work and how much that costs and things like that. So.
Now, so going back to water conservation, so, this drought we're in, how are we enforcing this? Because sometimes when I do go for a walk in the evening time, even right now, it's been raining, but I still see a lot of people have they're watering their lawn still.
Yeah, so we rely on, we're basically complaint-driven. We don't have a large enough staff to go out and do routes, and check like that. So we have a water waste reporting line, which is 617-4545, and we also have West Sacramento Connect on the city's website. So if you see something like that, please let us know. And then we send out a notice. Our staff will go out and investigate, and if it's confirmed, they check off that it's verified, and that counts towards the possibility of a penalty being assessed. And if it's not confirmed, we at least give them a notice and say it wasn't verified, but we've received a report that you were watering during the rain or whatever the case may be. And sometimes it's just an educational issue. If somebody didn't realize their sprinklers were still going off.
Yeah.
Oh, my timer's still going, that kind of thing. So if you see it, please report it to us so we can address it.
So some of these programs, are they gonna be just voluntary, like if somebody wants to come in and learn about water conservation, or are we gonna, some of the items in the general plan that I read, they talked about that, hey, we're gonna spend money on sending brochures, sending information, setting up, community talks, like how to save waters. Is this just gonna be voluntary basis, or are we gonna do something to reach out to every household in the
Well,
city?
our water conservation mandates, the restrictions we have right now, our outdoor water use restrictions are mandatory. So it's a situation where, again, though, we are relying on the public to let us know when they see, and our own staff will report back to my staff if they see violations of the mandatory restrictions. But, other than that, you can't, it's hard to make it something mandatory. We can't force someone to come to a workshop or participate in a rebate program. But the more diverse programs that we offer, I think will help us
get the most conservation out there. You know, some people don't have a lawn, so a turf conversion doesn't make sense to them, but we're gonna be doing a washer rebate matching program or things of that nature. So we're trying to have a well-rounded program that will appeal to everyone and get them thinking about ways to conserve water.
Well, just a quick question on the rebate program. Does that entail, I know that the lawns and hyper-efficient, washers, et cetera, would there be, I guess the drip systems are also a part of that, but like a gray water, I mean, the laundry to landscape, that's not part of the state's rebate program?
Not at this time. I haven't heard any talk about that type of rebate program. And the rebates that we're offering right now, some of them are in conjunction with grant funding that we received that was specifically for irrigation efficiencies. And there was a certain list of what qualified, so we had to follow those regulations, so we didn't have a lot of leeway. And then the rebate that we're going to roll out in January for the washers is that we're doing a matching with PG&E, so we're using their structure
Oh, okay.
to offer an additional incentive to our residents to get high-efficiency washers.
Do we have any more questions or comments? I think we're good. Is there anything else anyone like to bring up at this time? If not, then I think I'm going to adjourn. Is that
I'll second that motion.
you got a first and then a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.